Welcome to Sounds of Brass.
Brass band's history from Sounds of Brass. In Britain, a brass band, known regionally as a silver band or colliery band, is a musical ensemble comprising a standardized range of brass and percussion instruments. The modern form of the brass band in the United Kingdom dates back to the 19th century, with a vibrant tradition of competition based around communities and local industry, with colliery bands being particularly notable. The Stalybridge Old Band, still in existence, was formed in 1809, and was perhaps the first civilian brass band in the world. Bands using the British instrumentation are the most common form of brass band in the United Kingdom, Australia, and New Zealand, and are also widespread in continental Europe, Japan, and North America. The tradition for brass bands in the UK is continuing, and local communities and schools have brass bands. British band contests are highly competitive, with bands organised into 5 sections much like a football league. Competitions are held throughout the year at local, regional, and national levels, and at the end of each year there are promotions and relegations. The 2019 holder of the National Brass Band Championships of Great Britain was the Corey Band from South Wales. A selection of brass bands can be experienced at the annual Durham Miners Gala. There are also hotly contested annual events held on Whit Friday in the Saddleworth area of Greater Manchester, in which hundreds of bands compete. The terms brass band and silver band are synonymous in that the vast majority of bands termed either brass or silver incorporate musicians playing a mix of lacquered brass and silver-plated instruments. However, in the days when plain or lacquered brass instruments were not as costly as silver-plated ones, the term silver band implied an ensemble that could afford the latter and were thus perceived to be more successful. With the cost of each type now being similar, the distinction between brass and silver bands is generally not made. There are, however, some brass bands which carried the name Silver Prize Band as a result of their successes in contests and competitions. As time went on, some kept the name silver but not necessarily the instruments. Nowadays, the only real difference is that silver bands are located mainly in the south of England and brass bands in the north, although some silver bands do still exist in the north and many brass bands exist in the south. Most of the instruments used in British brass bands had been in use for some time in village, church, and military bands, and in the 1840s and 1850s the brass band emerged from these as a popular pastime. Brass bands were a response to industrialization, which produced a large working-class population, technological advances in instrument design, and the mass production to manufacture and distribute the instruments. A major improvement to the old designs was the development of efficient piston valves, which were easier to play and produced a more accurate, consistent sound. Arguably, brass bands were an expression of the local solidarity and aspirations of newly formed or rapidly growing communities. This was seen, for instance, in the creation of brass band competitions by the late 1850s. In 1853 John Jennison, owner of Bellevue Zoological Gardens in Manchester, agreed to stage the first British Open Brass Band Championships. The event was attended by a crowd of over 16,000 and continued annually until 1981. Brass bands reached their peak in the 1890s, when there were around 5,000 brass bands in the country. Today, there are 1,200 brass bands in Britain, with around 30,000 players. Many UK bands were originally either works bands or sponsored by various industrial concerns. This was particularly evident in coal mining areas, for example, bands such as the Grimethorpe Colliery Band and Carlton Main Frickley Colliery Band in Yorkshire. Bands sponsored by factories include the Black Dyke Mills Band, Yorkshire Imperial Band, originally the Yorkshire Copperworks Band, Foden sponsored by the truck manufacturer, Ferry sponsored by the aircraft manufacturer, and Leyland Band sponsored by the vehicle manufacturer. One of the reasons for this was to keep the workers from organizing in radical groups. With the decline of these industries, several bands have dissolved and others now draw their membership from other industries and other parts of the community. The Brighouse and Rastrick Band is unique in having operated continually at the highest level without sponsorship, drawing its income from regular concerts, public donations, and sales of recordings and merchandise. The leading bands in Wales include the Corey Band, Tredegar Town Band and Tom Winley's Temperance Band. The leading bands in Scotland are the Cooperation Band, formerly Cooperative Funeral Care, Whitburn Band, and the Kirkintilloch Band. All these bands compete at the highest level in the banding movement. There are also many non-contesting, or community, brass bands in the UK providing entertainment for audiences and enjoyment for musicians of all ages. British banding is highly competitive, with bands organised into 5 sections much like a football league. Championship section, 1st section, 2nd section, 3rd section and 4th section. Competitions are held throughout the year at local, regional, and national levels, and at the end of each year there are promotions and relegations. At a national level, the main contest is the National Brass Band Championships, and this determines a band section. For this, the UK is split into 8 regions: London and Southern Counties, Midlands, North of England, North West, Scotland, Wales, West of England, and Yorkshire. Each year, in spring, the bands compete in a regional contest for their section, and the top 2 or 3 in each section go on to the national finals in autumn. Recently, 2011, the finals for sections 1 to 4 have been held in Cheltenham, and the finals for the championship section at the Royal Albert Hall in London, as featured in the film Brassed Off. There are also separate contests for university brass bands, including the annual Unibrass contest, founded at Lancaster University in 2010 and hosted in 2023 by the University of Warwick. The Cambridge and Oxford University brass bands also compete against each other in annual varsity contests. The National Youth Band Brass Championships, held annually, has a Youth Champs non-competitive section, offering the opportunity for young people new to brass to take part and contribute a performance without the pressure of competition. Bands of all standards play in the debut section and join in the fun. Sounds of Brass, hope you have enjoyed a brief history of brass bands. Thank you for listening.